Hello and welcome to Pontus Points. Today I have one topic that has been basically ongoing for more than a year in Sweden, and that is the conflict between Tesla and trade union IF Metall. So just to give you a bit of a background here, what this is and why this is, because it might be less obvious for the non-Swedes here. So Sweden, the trade union IF Metall requests to get a collective agreement. And I'm using the term kollektivavtal in Swedish because it's kind of clumsy to say it in English. And Tesla says no. And then by law, IF Metall is allowed to go on strike, and other trade unions can take sympathy action, sympatiaktioner. So we've seen trade unions, IF Metall, and also a lot of the other unions set up those sympatiaktionerna to set up sort of hurdles for Tesla to operate its business in Sweden. But Tesla has been able to find ways around the actions all the time. So basically, Tesla is kind of unaffected by these actions. So that is sort of where we are still. They are, news is that they are not really negotiating anymore. So there are actions, and Tesla still says no. So looking at this from like a legal and theoretical perspective, in places where you have a big guy and a small guy, we tend to want to level the playing field, because otherwise it would be sort of unfair. We have, we in Sweden, but also in most of the other parts of the world, there are legislation to protect consumers, people who lease their apartments, and also sort of for workers. Because these are seen as relations that are kind of asymmetrical, where one party is really strong and the other is really dependent and weak. And if that retains, that means that the weaker party will have to yield basically all the times. So how do we do with companies and workers? Because that is sort of a special case. And in most of the cases, employers would handle their staff nice, but there are great parts of the labor market where people are treated really badly. So there needs to be sort of mechanisms to ensure that the workforce isn't exploited. I'm not saying that companies shouldn't make money or be able to compete, but we shouldn't sort of exploit people. I hope we can agree on that. So in most countries, there is a state-controlled level of minimum wage and also sort of the standard terms and conditions established between employers and the employees. In Sweden, the system is quite different, and I would argue that it's more like a market-driven one, because the most of the terms and conditions are handed over to the parties. So, but in order to have like the employers and the employees be able to talk, you need to have sort of a cluster of employees gathering together, forming sort of an entity that can represent many of them, and those are trade unions. So in Sweden, we have the system where the employers have their organizations and the employees have their organizations, and they negotiate in good faith and form something, and the government stays out of this. And I think most of the people who are more sort of leaning towards the right can sympathize with the fact that government isn't involved in this. The parties on the market handle it themselves. So in most of the cases, the kollektivavtal sort of replaces the labor regulation. We don't need that. I mean, we have a vacation defined in law, and the number of hours you can maximum work in a week, that's also governed by law. But most of the other terms and conditions, including minimum wage, is defined in the kollektivavtal. We do not have that in law. and also the kollektivavtal. That is a floor, it's not a roof. All right, so in other countries, you are always hit by labor regulation because it's stipulated by law. Nothing is sort of negotiable if it's part of law. But in Sweden, you're only hit by regulation stipulated by the kollektivavtal if you sign the kollektivavtal. So basically what happens is for small companies, they don't sign kollektivavtal, because if you are a small employer and you have like 3 employees, the kollektivavtal will be kind of clumsy. And the negotiating power between an employee and a single person being an employer in a kiosk or any other small business, they are not as asymmetric as we're sort of referencing here. When the company is big enough, the trade unions go in and sort of demand the kollektivavtal. And in most cases, they have been able to sign kollektivavtal. We've had a few conflicts such as these. Klarna was also a case, but they eventually gave up and signed the kollektivavtal and are happy now. So the confusing part is that we could have parties who are sort of, who are able to kind of fend off any trade union initiatives to force a kollektivavtal, which makes the situation a bit strange, because then you could have big companies not having minimum wage or their employees protected by a minimum wage or anything such as that. So to be honest, I think the Swedish way is a bit different. Either Sweden would need to impose minimum wage in legislation, or we would make it mandatory to actually sign kollektivavtal given a certain conditions. The conflict between IF Metall and Tesla is totally unfortunate, so it should be resolved by Tesla actually understanding that this is the tradition on this market. I'm fully aware that you do not like trade unions, and I think that's sort of a fair position. But you should also understand that there are portions left out of regulation and put in the authority of the parties on this market. So if you don't sign agreements with unions anywhere else, I think Sweden should be an exception. And I'm not a very big fan of trade unions, but I think that the negotiations between employers and employee representatives works really well here. So Tesla, I like your cars, but I don't like what you're doing here.